we're good to go. So, are we good to go? I think we're good to go. Cool. So we're here to talk with Tyler Folkman about his article, 7 Reasons to Not Hire a Data Scientist. I saw this article a few weeks ago and loved the title, loved the content. I thought it would be an interesting conversation for people because it could be semi-controversial, depending who you are. At any rate, at least for me, it resonated with a lot of things that I had seen in the field personally and professionally. So with that, Tyler, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So I have been in Utah for the last probably 4 years about. I'm currently at Ben doing AI for them. Ben is a product marketing company. So Ben stands for Branded Entertainment Networks. And what we do is we help basically brands put their product in the content. So that's either through things like product placement in TV shows or movies, or with influencers on like Instagram or YouTube, which is becoming quite popular. If you have children, watch out. It's apparently like the #1 job people want in the future is to be like a YouTube celebrity. So it's becoming a real thing. We use AI to try to basically predict performance on those campaigns so that before we spend money or a brand's money, we can help them really feel good about the influencers they'll work with and they'll work well for their brand. Kind of before that, I was at Ancestry doing genealogy and then grad school in Texas. And yeah, recently I've kind of gotten a little bit more into creating content and was convinced to move my content over from Medium to this blog. And then I've been trying to see what I could do to get some people to read it. And so, yeah, that's kind of how this article came to be. I thought it might be interesting, so I kind of put it out there.
That's awesome. And what prompted you to write this particular article? I mean, on the surface, it seems like you would maybe draw the ire of data scientists and potentially put a target on your back. I mean, it's an interesting title, and I think an interesting take on stuff. Like, why did you write it?
Yeah, I think for me, it was interesting to think about all the experiences I've had, all the companies I've talked to, just kind of in my career, all the people I've met. And I do think one of the biggest things I see is data science is kind of a newer discipline. So a lot of the people leading data science at a high level, maybe the executive level, don't have a lot of experience. I'm not to say like, there are definitely companies, Google, Facebook, and even companies like actuaries, right, that have been doing this for a long time and know how to hire for what they do. But when a fledgling tech company decides they want to do data science, a lot of times the person in charge of that doesn't really know how to manage that field. And that's not really any fault of them. It's just that's not their experience. And so I've found a lot that people kind of flounder around like, should I hire data scientists? Everyone's talking about data science. I think somehow it can help my company, but I'm not really sure how. So I thought I'd give some ideas on why you shouldn't. Because sometimes it's easier to know when you should, when you have a list of like, don't do this type of thing.
That's interesting. What's other people's experience with what Tyler had written in the 7 Reasons to Not Hire a Data Scientist?
I think just building up a culture of using data in an organization. I mean, there are like steps before a data scientist can be maximally productive in an organization. And I think first it's like getting people on board that data is important. There's like a layer of data engineering efforts, getting the data in the right place, understanding what it is, what it means, getting people to trust, kind of building this collective trust of data, and then actually taking advantage of that. And so I think it was spot on.
Yeah, and I definitely see that a lot, that people really need data engineers maybe first before, like, and a lot of people don't realize that there's a lot of different types of data roles. There is kind of like this idea of like a data unicorn that can do all of these things, which I think there are people that can do a lot of these things really well, but it's unlikely if you're first getting into it that you'll hire that type of person. And so generally it's better to understand the roles you need such as data engineering to kind of set up the data pipelines and the data, integrity, data analysts to maybe do some basic reporting, visualization, statistics, like what's your average sales over the last 10 years, like that type of stuff. Data scientists can do a lot of that sometimes, but it's not maybe the best use of their time depending on your goals.
Can I just give you my perspective?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's an open forum, so go for it.
Okay, so I'm an accountant, a CPA, and I'm in charge of our BI tool. And so we bought this tool, and now we're trying to figure out how to use it. Now, we had a CRM person hired, but they have since been let go. So basically, it's come back to me as one of the users of the system to be able to figure out how to use this tool. I'm still getting training from our provider, but from my perspective, what I'm trying to figure out is, what skill set do I need as an accountant to be able to get in, get the data, create the dashboards that I'm trying to provide for the users, right? And being the only person. So I'm not a data scientist. I don't have a data background. I'm not SQL guy, or even know much of the terminologies. But as an accountant, as a CPA, I think the future in our, to have our value added in the future of jobs is we'll need to be able to understand the basics of data extraction, how to connect to the data, different databases, using the tools and such. So from my perspective, I'm trying to find out how do I best get that skill set so that I can start adding value in my current role, but also, for the future of accountants.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of companies could actually get a lot of value from some like minimal consulting up front. Because a lot of these types of questions, if you get someone who kind of knows the space, they can look at exactly the tool you're using, the things that you want to try to accomplish, and give you some really solid advice around like, these are maybe people we should hire, or maybe you could just take this online course and it's actually not that bad and you can learn it and upskill people. The challenge with consulting is always, can you find people that aren't just going to like try to sell you on $100,000 types of projects? But I think if you can find people who are good, and I know Joe does some of this, I do some random things on my side as well, where finding these people that you think are really actually know what they're talking about and are going to try to sell you more than what you want, just like an hour or two of their time can be incredibly insightful to help you just get on the right direction. And that avoids the hire too, because a lot of times people don't want to do that. They feel a little bit weird about bringing someone in consulting, and so they go make a $100,000 hire or whatever it is. And now you're kind of stuck with this person when you might find out that's not actually the role I needed. I needed this other role, and that's not a great place to be in.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our company's perspective, right, we hired a CRM person, right, and they were the one running with this tool, and it was taking, it's been about a year since we've had it, and we haven't really seen any, evidence of, really useful information, right, and so the CEO is questioning, one, the person, but also the cost of why we got this software.
Right.
And I'm adamant about we need to keep this tool because data is where it's going to be for the future. To say, well, no, it's not worth whatever we're paying for it, and we'll just go back to, either doing nothing or just trying to use Excel or whatever else, right? So I'm all for the tool and getting into the data side of things. I think we should be doing more of it, not less of it. But I can see, if it's not done properly, the senior management team doesn't see the value that you're adding because, one, they say, well, the data is corrupted anyway. It's not, you're only reporting on bad data. So don't give me bad data because I already know it's not right. Versus how do you get through all that? What skill set obviously is the basic requirements so that you can start adding value and giving out good information to people. I would have loved that we would have kept someone that would help, run this tool. And I'd just be asking them saying, hey, this is the information I need out of it. We need a dashboard. We need this. We need this. But since now I'm the only one and I'm in the finance group, I want to make sure it survives, because if I kind of give up on this and say, I can't, I don't know what I don't have the skill set, they're going to say, well, let's not renew it, our subscription, and then it just dies.
We've actually seen this before. I remember a couple clients, one in particular had bought, what was it, Looker. And they'd actually been paying for it for 2 years without implementing it, which is, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then and this company had also failed, I think, 4 times and spent $4 million or something crazy on implementing BI. And I think that the issue they had was just adoption, right? Like people were using the tool. So, and then if nobody's using it, actually, Matt and I were just talking about this morning, where it's an interesting discussion right now with some of our partners, where sales is really difficult because nobody's buying, right? But now retention's a conversation point, and it comes back to like companies invest in these BI tools, for example, or AI tools or whatever tool, and really it comes down to is a business getting value out of these tools, right? Like, what's the ROI of that investment? Do you have adoption? If you don't have adoption, you're not going to have ROI probably.
And yet companies need data right now more than ever, right? Like they need to confront this new business reality that looks completely different from what it looked like 6 months ago. And they need a lot of data to figure out how to pivot and how to adjust to what's going on.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like the mindset has to be, whatever we were doing before wasn't working. We need to take advantage of this. I mean, companies aren't going to survive, COVID, but hopefully they'll realize that they could have been in better shape if they had done things in advance or had a better financial position. And I think getting into data, understanding your business more, right? And I'm all about, my end goal is to get the data so that I can produce a dashboard, and we're going to call it a KPI, right? From that KPI, it's going to either tell the business, based on what makes us successful, either we're doing what we need to be doing or we're not, and therefore we can, address our attention to the areas where we're weak. Right now, we don't even have the detailed layer of information to quantify, what we are doing or not doing. We're just looking at a very high level, and hopefully, you have enough revenue and you're making enough margin and you have enough cash, you get through it. Whereas if you dig down, use the tools that are available, because you're going to have to eventually, otherwise other companies are going to be, surpassing you, you'll see, wait a second, maybe we should be doing this particular product, because you know what, we don't actually make money on this. After we put all our costs and time and effort, we're actually losing money servicing that client. We just say, forget that, drop them, move on to something else. That's my end goal, but obviously need to understand how to connect the data. And, we have QuickBooks and we have CRM, TigerPaw, whatever database I need to connect to get the data first, and then I can start looking at it.
Yeah, I would say, I think Tyler's point's correct. Just talk to somebody. I mean, I'll just give you a half hour for free. Don't even worry about it, or an hour even, because I think your situation is, one, using to get data. Then two, it's like you need to know how to use a tool you got. And then there, I mean, you know enough about your domain. I don't think anyone needs to tell you how to do cost accounting. That's, you kind of know that pretty well. So, but yeah, that's interesting.
It is interesting. And this is what I'm trying to find out from, obviously you guys are in the, what I consider more of the IT side of, the data stuff, right? Is, you have users, end users, you have to obviously support, your company's objectives, right? So I'm giving you kind of my perspective as a user, but also someone, if I can get a skill set to at least, run the tool effectively, it's going to add value to the company.
Yeah, and I think one of the better feedbacks to my article was like someone called out a step 0 for like, don't hire data scientists. It was like, you just don't have a strategy. Like you just don't really know, which I didn't even call out because I kind of was assuming some things, but there are a lot of companies that, they just buy things without really knowing. Like buying an expensive tool like Looker for 2 years and just not doing anything with it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it actually happens in the world. Yeah, and I'd be interested if anyone else had any other thoughts too on things that particularly stood out to them. or things that they've seen in their careers that they think are clear red flags where you made this hire and you shouldn't have?
Yeah, I'm going to test this out. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Finally got audio working. So this is Daniel. Yeah, I mean, so I love the article, first off. And one thing that stands out to me is that, like, even if you do have someone, so you hire a data scientist and they're very skilled, what I've seen happen a lot is the expectations are just that they can do everything and all the things at the same time. And I think it's kind of two parts to that. I think there's one part is there's just not a real good understanding of how much work goes into doing data science. And especially if you're like trying to build a product, you know, we kind of understand this in the engineering world. Like, you know, if you're just going to change a web page and add a button, that's a huge thing. It has to be tested. It has to go through integrations. It has to, and so, you know, we understand that, you know, you need 10 engineers to do that. And it's going to take a couple of weeks to get done. But with data science projects, I think there's still not a lot of understanding about how much work it requires and what the steps are going to be to get there. So that's just kind of some of the thoughts that I had.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think engineering or computer science, software engineering, whatever you want to call it, has had a long history to kind of figure out some of these best practices, like how big should teams be? What people should be on those teams? What should their roles be? Do you use something like Agile or Jira? And data scientists are kind of somewhat adopting a lot of these ideas, but a lot of times they don't work. Like Agile is not a bad system, but in my opinion, you can't just straight up use it for data science because a lot of the work is unknown. Like you start a sprint with some goal, but you actually change a lot depending on what you learn. Where in some more traditional software engineering, for example, your button, you know you can make the button. You know to make the button, you do these steps and it will be made on the front end, and then you just have to create tickets for that, and they do those tickets and off you go. Data science, it might be something like, can we predict sales or can we forecast X? We don't even really know if it's possible right now. So the steps to actually do that is not clear that you can just say do X, Y, and Z. Which I think is kind of one of the things I called out in the way I said is you're expecting unicorns and rainbows. Like you think you're going to give them this thing and say, go solve it, and they're going to solve it and you're going to be super happy. But generally there's a lot of failure in the data science process in my experience. Which, I mean, I get why do you do it, but generally I think if you can do it right, the benefit exceeds the failures, but you have to be okay with the failures. Sorry, I think I cut someone off.
One of the biggest organizational frictions that my group has been with like those expecting unicorns, in that they expect unicorns at a certain point in time, and then data science takes the estimates are off. It took 2-3 weeks longer to get the model to the level that they wanted it, and now like the team that's going to go implement and turn that model into business value is like, oh, we moved on. Like, so.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. In fact, I'm a really big proponent of full stack ownership for data scientists, meaning that I think data scientists should exist on a team that can own from idea to value generation, because I've seen that a lot where it's like, oh, we've got this model, and then you go to this other team and like, can you help us get this into the system? And they're like, sure, but we're like 2 months out, you know, we've got these other things going on. And then they come back to your thing, and like it ends up taking a year to get this thing out that maybe took like 6 weeks to make, and it's just like really frustrating. So what we do on my team is full ownership from idea to value generation, and to make that happen, we have data engineering teams that build platform tools to allow data scientists to effectively access queries, store data models, and get them into production, which is kind of a theory I've taken from Stitch Fix, if you follow their blog much, where data engineers they shouldn't be like monkeys taking code and then shipping it for you. they should be people building really cool stuff that help data scientists do cool stuff. I don't think anyone wants to just take someone else's code and like refactor it for production. It's not a fun job.
What are some of the other unicorns and rainbows people have seen? I always am curious on about that. So.
The other one interesting unicorn rainbow I've seen in our organization is people expecting like dramatic improvements over heuristics. Like, we have workflows that like people have come through and done like a little bit of heuristic work on, like if the user's done X, they're probably interested in Y for recommendation engines, just like some very simple rules. And then data science comes through and is only able to beat the heuristic by small amounts, which I think is fair, but it's been another source of conflict.
Yeah, I have a interesting anecdote from my time in grad school. I was interviewing for companies. I interviewed with Dropbox, and I'm like coming out of doing a bunch of machine learning in grad school. Like, how can I help Dropbox do machine learning more? And like, you guys should really use machine learning to like recommend your file system, right? Like your file system should be smart and it should know what I want to work on. And like, sure, that's me. And they're like, yeah, it turns out if you just sort things by the last modified date, it turns out that works really well. I'm like, yeah, that's fair enough. It's a pretty simple heuristic that maybe gets you 95% of the way, and is that extra 2-3% worth the complexity of something else? It's probably not. It's probably not true.
I had a similar thing where almost identical. We were actually Dropbox was one of our customers. Was using our product. It was funny. It was you've seen them the apps that are on conference rooms, right? Where you can book a room. When we used to go to offices, that's a good thing of the past now. But it was interesting because people were like, "Oh, can you do like AI recommendations for rooms?" And we're like, "You mean like sorting them by like what rooms you typically use?" Because I think that's kind of where you would, if your room is close to you, you're probably going to go to that room, right? I mean, you're not going anywhere else in your building. So, I mean, that was, I think to your point, the heuristic was, it worked really well. So,
yeah, and I think, yeah, it's interesting because I do think like, in the broadest sense, you could consider like a heuristic a type of artificial intelligence, right? Like if people are really stuck on this like idea of it has to be artificially intelligent, like that is some type of artificial intelligence. It's not machine learning, but yeah, people do get definitely hung up on certain types of ways they want things to happen. I think deep learning is one of those things as well. Like, are we using deep learning? And a lot of times it makes sense. You know, if you've got unstructured data, image, text data, you really should be using deep learning. But there are definitely times when it doesn't make a lot of sense, and you should maybe walk away from that for a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's definitely like a gigantic nuclear bomb for structured data, especially. Like, trying to do like deep learning on Excel, basically data that should be in Excel. It's overkill. So,
yeah,
it's interesting because I remember, you know, to the heuristic point again, it was interesting. I remember there was one person I was interviewing, and I asked him, okay, so tell me about some machine learning you've done. And he's like, well, I took some like structured data sets and then did the clustering on it. And I was like, he kind of described what he was doing. It's not a lot like a group by statement in SQL. Like you could have just done that and gotten literally the same answer as you did with this like k-mean thing you did. But I'm glad you learned k-means, but it could have had a better application, I guess. So, but it is what it is. So.
Guys, I'll give you another of my perspective on things as well. Is especially in the accounting side, auditing. There's a lot of talk around AI taking over, you know, the basic auditors looking at all the transactions, right? Sampling them, because AI will just basically audit all the transactions and then come up with assessments. So as an accountant, we're having to find other ways to add value in the audit process. So what do you guys think about the future of AI doing a lot of this thing? And then, you know, just and how you see your, you know, profession and roles either, you know, picking up some of this information or will it, you know, be going in a different direction?
So was the question kind of like the use of AI kind of in the auditing process?
Did I get cut off?
Well, no, we weren't you.
Yeah. I guess it's just trying to understand, because I'm looking from a financial perspective, but obviously the back end of AI and blockchain and all the other, the data that's going to be coming at us. How do you see that, I guess, in your careers? Is that something that's going to enhance your careers or eliminate some of the roles? Or
so I remember a couple of years ago, I was actually talking to a CPA friend of mine who had the same concern, like, oh, my job's going to be gone because I keep reading these articles on AI taking my job. And I was like, well, I think maybe the heuristic, basically, I think what you can do is if you can flowchart a job, I mean, that can already be automated, frankly, for the most part, right? And now with new advances in like natural language processing and text extraction and what vision and everything else, I mean, I think it's only going to start eating away at things that can be flowcharted. But the value add, though, is like, especially for somebody who's a CPA or your value add is in strategy anyway. I mean, I call my accountant all the time for stuff. He's a CPA, and it's for tax strategy. That's because there's so much gray area in that stuff. I don't know how you would ever automate that. I mean, thank God the IRS, in America at least, is dense and opaque, because I think that's going to save a lot of jobs. But if it can be flowcharted, I think you can pretty much guarantee that those jobs will be automated at some point. So
yeah, strategy and research too, right? I mean, a lot of accounting is forensic, especially where you're doing audits, and so I think the AI is going to take care of the top level and point out potential problems, but then someone still has to kind of go and look through things and try to track down those problems, and the AI doesn't fully solve the problem for you.
I mean, yeah, well, the information I've been reading about, and this is coming from CPA Canada, is, they're really pushing that accountant's role will change. I'm talking maybe, in general terms here, because auditing is only one part of, what accountants can do. But from an audit perspective, taking away the actual, sampling of transactions and following through, that process will go away with AI. But where they see accountants is, because we understand the numbers, we understand the business, is then we'll have to transfer our knowledge so that we can, one, let's say, ensure the data that we're auditing is correct, or there's controls in place to ensure all data has been included from that perspective, right? That's what I'm kind of getting at with AI taking over certain responsibilities or accounting functions. Even in accounts receivable, payable, you could have a machine entering data, however you get invoices in the system, right? So that'll eliminate the actual person doing the clerical work, but then it will free up their time to do more added value, right? And that's where I see getting into more data reporting, analysis, dashboarding, understanding the data, so that you can then give that information to the senior leadership team, who then can make better strategic decisions, right? So
yeah, machine learning is incredibly stupid. It's at the end of the day, it's pattern recognition. It's not smart. I kind of hate the fact that like intelligence is included with the word artificial intelligence, because it's like it's a term that's been around for a really long time, but it was meant, even back when Turing had described it, it was more like, can I have a conversation with something and not know the difference if it's a person or not, right? That was sort of the essence of what AI was supposed to be. People like Stuart Russell and so forth have talked more about like, and it's, if you look at, I'm going to bring up the history of kind of where this has gone, because it used to be like symbolic logic and other approaches to AI, because what you're trying to do is mimic the human thought process, which is incredibly difficult. The modern approaches to AI are no more than basically, for the most part, statistical and mathematical approaches that have been around for decades or hundreds of years. There's nothing that groundbreaking about what's going on. The AI doesn't know causality, for example. They can't tell you in an auditing sense, like what caused this behavior, right?
Yeah.
Underlying it.
You just give you exceptions, right? Or things that stand out, like red flags, as opposed to normalized data, and then this is an exception. Therefore, you should
We don't
look
know
at
if the flag if it had been trained on a red flag, or if it's doing like anomaly detection or something. But yeah, I mean, I don't. Like I said, if things have like a flow chart, I think those jobs are going to be going away, period. It doesn't matter if it's AI or an if else statement, right? Like that's just how that goes. But yeah, trust me, I've worked with finance teams. Like the strategy and the research part is like so much more involved than what I think AI is capable of doing right now. I think what you're hearing is actually a lot of hype is what I'm trying to get at. So
I think for me, if I try to think about jobs that have actually been completely automated away, there's very few. I think generally what happens is they change because of tools that become available. Like if you think about a computer scientist, you think might be like a really easy job to automate away because it's like the people are really good at writing code to write code for themselves. Well, they do that and they're called libraries. And they use them to simplify their work, but that doesn't mean they don't do work. It means they do new work, they do different work, they do better work, cooler work. And I think the same thing happens with data science. It happens with accounting. Like as technology enters fields, it allows people to do hopefully more engaging, more useful work, and the things that are automatable kind of go away, right? Like me as a data scientist, I don't have to write my own random forest implementation because it's already done for me. And so now my time can be spent doing other things. And I think all fields naturally go through this, and the people that continue to survive and to do well in those fields upskill, right? As their careers go on, they are continuing learning, they're continuing making sure that like, where's this field moving? What do I need to do? And I think that's why a lot of people talk about like coding is like the next, like everyone should know how to code, because like, well, if you're in finance and you know a little bit of Python, it's actually really powerful for you because you can automate some of these things to allow you to be more valuable. So for me, I don't worry so much about jobs being completely automated away for the most part. What I do worry about is the ability of our society to support upskilling effectively, so that people don't get left behind. That's kind of where my mind goes.
So hello everyone, Guy here. Hey, I got a thumbs up, so obviously stuff's working. I missed intros at the start because I switched headsets and lost any sound myself, so I didn't know what people were saying, let alone microphones. So yeah, I had a read through Tyler's little short article, and I thought, oh yeah, great point number one. Point number two, I thought, oh, that's even more true. And by about points 3 or 4, I think I was sobbing, because really identified with that. And I think it was a very interesting distinction to go from point 1 to 2 to say that, well, okay, you've got some data, but you don't actually have the right data. And that kind of also spoke to point number 3 for me as well, because largely my previous role came to an end because of a bit of a train wreck of those 3 things together. There was an absolute lack of the necessary labels in the business. And there was this perception that a data scientist could come and do AI and magic would happen. And they wouldn't need to sort out their issues with their data labels, with their ground truth, with their business process. And that just turned out it was very difficult to find even a clear problem to solve, because it was just like, well, go away, we've got this problem, talk to, find a project, that has this problem and solve it for them. And every time you talk to someone, they'd go, well, actually, no, we're okay, thanks, because they had no idea that actually they were drowning themselves, because there was not that leadership, that they thought it was okay to take 2 weeks to get some numbers together by aggregating 5 different spreadsheets across 6 people. And so that just did not provide the data that you could automate, that they struggled to even be ready for data analytics. And that kind of got me thinking when Tyler was talking just about libraries, and libraries are a very enabling thing. So people could do higher level stuff, people can do more. It does allow you to try a random forest or a k nearest neighbor or a support vector machine or whatever, very quickly. You don't have to code all of these things yourself, taking 6 months to sort of do it, to then test it, and then say, oh, actually, hey, a support vector machine didn't, do very much for us. But it then kind of, I suppose, speaks to, you've got more people able to do more stuff, and this army of these people, this tsunami of these people that can wield, scikit-learn, are kind of like flooding across these businesses that are going, actually, our data, our infrastructure isn't up to these things that you can do.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with me, for sure. I think I even wrote, I'm actually talked to a guy in Utah recently about this, Ben Taylor. I'm going to release the video kind of soon. But one of the things too that I think is funny, to the point you called out, is there is a lot of people now that have these skills like scikit-learn. Like maybe 5-10 years ago, the ability to train multiple models on a data set was unique, right? And it was like really cool. Now, I think a lot of people trying to get in this field don't realize that what you think makes you special doesn't actually make you that special, which is kind of this other problem, getting a job if you want to get a job. And then companies too, even when they hire people, they have a hard time differentiating them. And then when they get them, to your point, they don't really know what to even do with them. They don't know if, they generally have some sense of like, well, if AI could do this thing for us, that would be amazing. And then you kind of start asking these questions. Well, do you have data on that? Is that data labeled? Is it in a system we can access? Like, what do you mean data? Like, I thought you could just do these things for us and, make this awesome. And it would be nice if it were that way, but there's a lot of processes that have to be set up.
And sort of onto point 7, you don't know how to hire a data scientist. I find that a lot of these conversations that we have, it's kind of, it's data scientists being mutual support and therapy for each other because they've been through these things. But how, or do you think that this message, this problem, is actually propagating into the businesses? Because data scientists can be very aware of this, but they're kind of typically aware of it from experience because they've already been, say, hired into a business that's having that problem. So how do we, it's almost like a cold start problem for businesses. How does a business know to hire the right person to start with without having hired a few data scientists and realizing that they weren't up to it? How do we actually get that message across to them?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's a really hard one to answer. I think one thing that we can do, particularly as data scientists, is try to develop the skills to kind of find these red flags before joining a company, and also develop the skills such that if you do see some red flags, you know how to solve them and can maybe figure out ways to make the culture change. So if you as a data scientist come into a place and you realize, hey guys, you don't really know what you're talking about, that's okay. I see enough here and I know how to help you. And before you join, you kind of say, hey, we need to make changes here, and they're on board with that. I think data scientists can start to make those changes. And I think in some sense, that's maybe an upskill for data scientists that we can work on, is not just being the algorithmic people, but also being better at the strategy around how to make this happen. But that does take a certain culture, right? If there isn't an executive you're getting hired into that just isn't wanting to listen. And that's where I think if we can get better at finding big enough red flags that we should walk away from a job, even if they're offering you, 50% more in money. In fact, that's actually one of the bigger red flags. If someone offers you like 50% more than you're pretty sure you're worth, it probably means they don't know what they're doing. But I mean, it's good for you, I guess, in the short term.
Joe, can I just add my perspective too again here, because I think it comes back to even what I'm trying to do just with a BI tool is they have to see the value. Which I mean, obviously we bought the tool, right? We had a resource dedicated to it, right? But without the senior management level buying into this, for whatever reason, whether it was the reason it was done or not done, if you don't have buy-in from the senior management level team driving this, your role is just seen as, oh, well, he's in IT, he's doing that, right? As opposed to, if the CEO is saying, hey, I want this project to be successful, we're all going to buy into this. The data scientist will be the one getting the data out and in the format we need it. But the end result is to get the information so that we can use it, correct? So without that buy-in and that mindset, you're always going to be challenged because you're having to prove your existence versus, someone coming to you and say, hey, I need this information. You're a valuable part of the organization. And with your knowledge, you're going to help change this company.
I think you're hitting on something too. And I love talking to finance people because you're so grounded in the realities of the business and the needs of how you're going to deploy capital, right? So I think the tendency is for data scientists, at least some of them that I know, some of them are more practical, but a lot of them want to, I think we mentioned people who are coming out in hordes knowing sklearn. Like there's, I think sort of a science project mentality once you get into a business, like, oh, show me where I can do ML. And it's like, well, right. I mean, part of that is a hiring problem to begin with. And I think to Tyler's point and the guy's point, it's sort of the expectations need to be sort of, I think, level set. Because if they're not, my prediction is in 5 years that the term data science, the title is going to go away. It's right now, I don't like the title because it's too ambiguous. It doesn't mean anything anymore. Like I sort of quit that data science is neither. So it was, you know what I'm saying? Because it back when Drew Conway 10 years ago had written this Venn diagram of what he thought data science was hacking skills and stats and domain expertise. That was more of like a stab to sort of like shoehorn in something I think it was DJ Patel or somebody had come up with a term for data science, right? And it was just sort of off the cuff. And now all of a sudden it's a job description that encompasses data analytics, possibly data engineering, machine learning, AI research. And it's like at that point, like, what are you hiring for? Like back when I got into data in the early 2000s, titles were very descriptive. It's like, you are a business analyst. You will analyze the business. And it's strange because people still do this, even though now they're called either an analyst or a data scientist. The term is just becoming so overloaded. But what happens is expectations go through the roof because C-level execs and directors read about, well, if I get a data scientist, we're obviously going to see a great growth in our business. And then when finance people like yourself start looking at the results, you're like, well, so who are we going to start cutting? What can we do without here? Because we're not seeing a lot of results. My litmus test was always, am I doing enough to at least pay for myself, right, in my job? And if I can't, if I'm not working at research, then maybe we need to try a bit harder and focus on the right problems. But the right problem discussion goes on and on up the chain, because if the CEO has some weird idea that they want to work on, and that's kind of the direction you're going, and I guess it's what it is. So anyway.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying. And I know when you guys all together, just like accountants, we're passionate about what we do, and we could talk, for days on, the intricacies of what we do. But at the end of the day, that senior level guys, they don't care what you're talking about, what, language you're using, or how you've got the new latest thing, and it's taking, your processing time down from, 2 days to 30 minutes. At the end of the day, that's what they're paying you to do and figure it out. But the end result is, what are we doing with this data that we're getting, and how is it adding value to the business? Because if it doesn't add value and they don't see any return, they start questioning, well, do we need this person, or do we need this group? Or, if the data is bad, therefore, all we're doing is reporting on our bad data. So maybe there's no value here, right? And I think, you guys in your field need to then, you need to get associated with someone that could, see the value you're adding. And as you talk about covering your wages, right? So how would you then justify what you're doing has saved the company? Maybe it's created more revenue. You could say, well, what we have done, you can start quantifying that, I just created another $1 million of opportunity, right? Or I've cut costs by $300,000 because, if we start doing certain things, would change how we think. And you're like, well, wait a second. They'll say, well, then let's hire 3 more of these guys, because, in finance, when we're trying to grow the business, it's all about sales. Okay, well, we have 10 sales guys, and we They generate $1 million each. So let's hire 10 more sales guys, right? They think, IT, finance, back end, we're all just headcount. We're all just, overhead costs, and we don't generate revenue or save money for the company, right? But if we could start doing that, you can see, hey, by doing this, we've changed the way we think. Or you find data and say, we've been making a mistake, let's change that. And by not doing something, you're either saving money or creating incremental revenue. Any CEO or CFO is going to say, hey, let's hire 3 or 4 more of those guys. Or let's start paying them more, because you know what? They're saving us or creating more revenue for us.
I like what you say there about, I think, creating value or adding value. I think from the perspective of data, it makes me wonder. It makes me sort of want to say, is data the same as the environment? Because if you think about businesses are run, people like yourself, the bottom line, the dollar, is it saving money? Is it making money? That's the value. And you've got the problem there of how do we get businesses to be environmentally friendly if polluting is the cost-effective way of, running your business? How do you make businesses be more green? And perhaps the longer term approach there is the more enlightened approach, where people realize that actually you're creating expenses for yourself down the line, whether that's because of poorer air quality and reduced health, or maybe it's some sort of commuting problem, or you can turn these environmental issues into that dollar bottom line, which is kind of what businesses have started to do. They've started to see that actually there is a real cost to sort of polluting. How do we do that with data? How do we get businesses to actually start to really value, to an extent, data for itself? How do we get them to realize that by not looking after data, by not having processes that align with the data that they're capturing and having the data accessible, well governed, etc., how do we get them to appreciate that they are going to be in for a world of hurt X years down the line?
Well, I know what you're saying. And if a company says, yeah, we're green and we're doing things to help the environment, right? We cut costs. We're saving on paper because we do this. We're saving on ink. All those things, you can make an effort in trying to project that you're doing this, and you can prove those things. You can use data to identify some of those things, right? Where you have excess, or you're not as efficient or effective in doing something, right? But it all comes back to the mindset of the company. If a company wants to be in the oil and gas industry, but also environmentally friendly, right? They could be doing things differently, as well as getting the oil out of the ground, right?
But how do we have sort of, if we sort of look at the points, that we sort of might talk to, businesses not having data, or not having the right data, not having a clear problem to solve, how do we sort of turn those into a financial incentive for businesses?
So I'm wrestling with the same problem pretty directly. So I report to your director of IT. Our director of IT is like, here's my pile of costs. I need to justify them, preferably in the same unit of US dollars as my costs. So he's come back to me and is like, how do you justify, what is the value your group's providing? Can we enumerate that? And it's real tricky, because I can point to this data we provide is being looked at by every sales rep every day as part of their job. It's useful to them. But one, I can't take claim to some percentage of sales because of it without sales coming back no, we made those sales. These are our numbers to claim. At the same time, as the engineer on the ground, I provide this data that then gets processed at multiple levels by analysts, sales operators, before it gets to the people using it to make money. So like actually allocating the value has been very difficult.
I agree. It's hard, even in finance. How do we justify our roles, right? Because we're just crunching numbers and reporting on historical data. But we know we do add value, and we can, help lead the business down the right path, becoming more of a strategic advisor as opposed to just a historical reporter, right? Same with IT. I mean, I've always worked very closely with finance and IT because obviously we need systems, whether it's accounting systems, ERP, CRMs. Those are all IT, mixture. Everything's up and running. If your computers, if you're not up and running on your computer, right, you can't be productive. You lose, access to be able to work. So, having to just everything up and running is one thing, right? But I think we're getting into the where's the data, going to help us. Is we need to, and this comes time, we have to basically, justify our existence because we can add value, and we have to find ways to make management realize that what we are doing is adding value, not just adding costs. And you just talked about, having the right data. I mean, that depends on what you're referring to, because that's kind of general. But if you don't have the right data, and why should we report on bad data, is then you have to take a step back and say, well, what data do we need? And therefore focus our attention on getting the data that we need versus what we have.
So one thing that comes to mind that I've been thinking about, especially as Guy was talking, is that the data science is inherently a disruptive field. It's we if we're doing our jobs right, we want to come in and we want to have an impact. We want to create change in our organization. And so what comes to mind is this disruption often scares people, and people are averse to change. And so I've had that happen in my job sometimes, where I realize that the stuff I'm working on could in some ways threaten people's ideas, or there are definitely managers, for example, who like making decisions based on their gut. They don't want you coming in and using data to prove them wrong, for example. And so I think that's always a challenge, that you have these traditional organizations who are used to doing things a certain way, and data science and analytics, the whole field in general is working to change the business, to modernize it. And so that's I think a challenge that's going to continue to be there for a while.
There needs to be a distinction made, though, I think, with data science, because I think it really encompasses two areas. If you're a data native company, for example, and you're using AI in your applications, like Google, for example, I think that's like the ultimate, or Facebook, they're like the ultimate examples of like AI first companies, because everything they do is data driven, right, from the get-go. But that's from a product angle. I know for a fact that both these companies are absolute shit shows internally in their politics. And that's also an area where data scientists and analysts. So it's like you have data scientists that work on a product angle of things. On the other end of things, it's the business facing part is I think a lot more difficult, because now you're dealing with organizations and politics, and as you say, people who are more gut driven. I think they're called hippos, the highest paid person's opinion, right? So so you have that battle over here, and I think data science is almost easier on the product end of things, because you're working with engineering and just doing your thing, and if the product is successful and growing into your metrics and all standards, when it comes to reporting, even within some of these organizations that I mentioned, I know that things are much different. People have agendas. I don't know how you get away from that, unfortunately. It's an interesting thing. And then when you mentioned intimidating people sometimes, or people feel intimidated when they talk to you, right? Or they feel threatened. Like that's that's a natural response, especially when people are around smart people. They get defensive.
For me too, I think this could even be in addition to the reasons not to hire data scientists is if, and this is probably for any role, is you don't have an expectation of what value they'll provide to you, which I think can vary greatly depending on what your goal is. So like I know DeepMind lost Google like was $500 million last year or something. And I know people kind of like laughed at that. I was like, what are they doing? But Google's expectation with DeepMind is not to make money, especially not to make money in the short term. They're strategically investing in a long-term bet around things like artificial general intelligence that I'm sure they realize is a very long-term play. And if they figure some things out, it'll be worth it in the end for them. And that's their expectation. And so that works for them. If your expectation with DeepMind was to be making money right now, you would probably, get rid of that organization. And so I think it's important too when people are hiring or even looking to be hired to talk to the people hiring you, like, what is your expectation? How will I be evaluated on my value to the company? And sometimes I think an answer that's totally fine is we have these things that need to be built and we want you to build them. So for example, we need to predict this thing and this thing and this thing. And then you can start asking more questions like, well, can we even do this to make sure you're qualified? But I do think the expectation is really important, and the way you quantify the value of a role can really be different. It doesn't always have to be value now. It can be potential value in the future, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, eventually it's going to return value, right? It's an upfront cost for future value, and they're doing something so that they can be profitable in the future, right? That's the reason they're doing this, so they can be a leader. They can be, have advances on others so that they're a leader in the market, right? So all those are going to create value, right? At the end of the day, I think that's what we're trying to justify, right? Unless we're just doing things for the sake of it, to whether in help the environment or not for profit. But obviously, most of us are working on profitable companies trying to add value from that perspective, right? So as an example, the whole terminology around BI, like business intelligence, right? To me, I'm like, oh, wow, that sounds really great. So I'm thinking that this tool is going to be so intelligent, it'll do something. And I'll say, as an example, forecasting, it'll get to a point where it'll know more than the people that are running the business, and it'll tell us what we're going to forecast our revenue in 2-3 years from now. I know it's not going to happen, and I know that's just a terminology, but the perception, at least on some of us, is this tool is so smart that it's actually going to start thinking for us, and we won't have to worry about the gut feeling of, oh, what do you think is going to happen, right? I mean, I struggle trying to get a 2-month out forecast of revenue, because after a couple of months when we don't have any service orders or nothing in backlog, I reach out to, the senior salesperson who says, well, I don't know. I mean, what's the crystal ball saying, right? And it's, forecast accuracy. So how accurate are you with when your results compared to what you said you were going to do, right? There's value there, because if you're so deviant from what you actually do, people don't rely on the information you're providing because you're not accurate, right? I'm trying to get to a point where if I am forecasting, somehow this tool will be more accurate or more detailed so that it can be more accurate, right? And that's how, I'm trying to take away some of the gut feeling of how things are going to go. I mean, sometimes it's not always the case, and people have the reasons for what they do, and it makes sense, but
The interesting thing, I think, if I'm in your, there's a bit of if I'm a marketer or a BI or an AI company, people like you are great, because I can just make pitches and make claims all day about how great my product is and how it's going to just change your business and all this stuff, right? And I think the other people in this group who are, I think, more like AI types or ML types or just data, it's interesting because I think
we have a healthy dose of skepticism, and I think you have that too. But in a lot of cases, I know I'm called in by C-level executives to kind of just be a bullshit detector. Like they have companies coming to us with products that claim that this will just revolutionize your business. It's AI, and you look under the hood and you're like, this is just like marketing bullshit. Sorry for swearing. But I wouldn't dare spend any money on this. You're just going to waste your time and money and your reputation. So, but it's sort of the Wild West right now. I think it's, especially a few years ago, it was even worse. I think now that people are getting a better sense of like what's possible, like a lot of the charlatans are starting to get called out, and I think rightfully so. Because all it does is it makes people like who are in this chat look bad too. There's a halo effect. Oh, well, you're data science guys too, so you're obviously just a bunch of scam artists or something. So it's sad. I mean, we saw this in the auto ML space, especially where companies would say, "Oh, you just give us any data set."
I still get pitched a new auto ML platform a week.
Sweet. How do you respond to that?
I don't. They're all unsolicited, so I just leave it alone.
The thing about auto ML platforms is you're pitching data scientists is like, even if they wanted auto ML, they could get it for free with like a few lines of code from like some open source library. Like they're not the people you should be pitching.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah, that's the big one though. I mean, because and on one hand, I can see it. Like we had a client of ours who tried out Google's AutoML tables to make a fraud prediction model, and according to him, it works really well. I can't verify, but he was ecstatic over this. That over a couple of years, he was able to make a model that detected fraud on his website. And I'm like, if that makes you happy, then it works. Then I guess it is what it is, right? So in other cases, it's a lot of these products are pitching though that you can become like a citizen data scientist, and you too can make predictions or something. So it's crazy. So
Somebody at one of the conferences for CPA, the presenter had mentioned that accountants have to become data scientists, and we have to start learning SQL and understanding the data and blockchain and all this, right? And you can imagine the response from the from the audience, right? Because they'd be like, "Well, wait a second, I'm an accountant. Why would I want to become a data scientist? That's a whole different field."
You know how hard it is to become a CPA?
I don't know.
It's a lot of work.
It is. I mean, but that's like anything, right? I mean, I've always been, amazed at the stuff that, you guys do, right? I don't understand it. I'm hearing more and more of it now that I'm trying to learn a BI tool, right? But, and it's all interesting, and I'm like, wow, it's a whole different field, and I don't try to fully understand it because to me, I don't need to know that, right? It's it's the ends to the means, right? But when it's your profession and you love doing this, you're coming up with different ways, and you guys are all excited about it, the latest language or the latest way to do something, right? That's all good for you guys, right? And you can change your profession, you can get into more added value things and take away, you're not writing code all day, right? Because there's a perception that everyone, just writing SQL, like how interesting can that be? If that's all you do all day, right? Just like when they say, well, you're an accountant, you crunch numbers all day. How exciting can that be? You sit at your office and, right? But we know that's not all we do. It's just a means to the end, right? But when, someone's telling us if we want to keep our jobs, we have to become, versed in SQL, writing code and blockchain, and, that kind of worries us.
Well, there's no reason why you should need to be a data scientist to write SQL. You could go back a number of years and say, oh, why should I use one of these electronic spreadsheet things? I'm an accountant.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think arguably a healthy organization would have data readily available for SQL queries, so that could be regularly how the finance team pulled the data that they needed.
Yeah, and there are a lot of tools coming out now, like Looker and other things, where it's like, in my opinion, the whole idea is to make data more accessible to people that don't know things like SQL. I think that's a smart idea. Even some of the tools like Metabase, which are open source to some degree, are pretty good. You can kind of almost use English to get results back, and it's pretty empowering.
I think there's still a big value add for a data literate person there to make sure to verify what goes into these systems in the first place. Because I saw this at my previous place. There was a perceived issue with getting hold of data, so they jumped upon this data warehouse effort, and you could just see that what it was going to be was just a corporate data dump. It was going to be, look, it's not a case of getting hold of this data. It's a case of how this data was created in the first place. All you've done is moved it from one place to another. We still don't really quite know what is actually going to be in this warehouse and whether you can trust it.
I definitely agree. I mean, that's always going to be the case, and I'm kind of fighting that with this current project. Is some are saying, well, the data is either incorrect or it hasn't been entered properly. It's missing fields, therefore you're only going to get garbage in, garbage out. So why spend money and effort on getting the same data that we know is wrong, right? So then you say, well, let's correct the process then. Let's get the data right before we start seeing this. But if you have that mindset, well, the data is always wrong, therefore why bother? You'll never get to the advancements that you start using the data, right? And I'd rather use bad data than no data, right? At least you could identify this is wrong, right? You give it to someone and say, well, that can't be right. Well, okay, well, that's what the data is telling us. So therefore, let's focus on changing the process to get the data right. Then once the data is right, we can start relying on it and make better strategic decisions.
Well, bad data that you know is bad is one thing. It's the bad data that you don't know is bad.
I agree. I agree. But then, therefore, how do you, quantify or try to determine whether data? And I've always had this issue, because how do I know the data that you're providing is accurate, right? What do I base it against? As an auditor, you're always wondering, well, here's the information. You're like, well, is it right? Or is it all encompassing? How do I know there's not missing data? So those are the things then you can start focusing on to ensure, spending your extra time validating the data versus getting the data, right? I don't know. And these are the things just from my perspective. I think you got to work with the IT group to get the information out, right? So to justify why we have a senior data person versus a junior person versus a team of 10 is, once you start seeing the information and the value coming out of this, it'll justify, it'll help support the need to start doing more of this.
Well, and I think that what helps know if the data is good or not is an in-depth analysis of it, and so that's where the statistical tools come in play and are really, really important. I guess in my position, I see people report on data, and data quality is just a big issue, and so it's one thing to just report numbers, but it's another thing to do an in-depth analysis and see, like, do these distributions actually make sense? Are there problems with the data? Are there outliers? Are there things that clearly show that the data doesn't match what we expect? And that's something that a data scientist can do for you. And I think, this goes along with Tyler's article number 2, and I think it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, because almost every data science project I've ever worked on, I didn't always have the right data. Like there was some good data, but I had to go and get more, or I had to do something to fix the data. And I don't see any way of knowing if you have the right data unless you really dig in and do the statistical analysis on it, do the exploratory data work. And there's not a lot of people that I guess do that. So I'd be interested in what other people have to say on that.
Well, see, that's my point, Daniel, is that if you can get at least the data out so that people at a certain level can, start saying, well, that's either right or wrong, right? Then it can justify you to say, well, we need more in-depth analysis. So we need to get another role or, resource to do that. And then they can focus on getting that validation process down so that the data that you do get is clean, good, and then can be used.
This speaks, I think, when you were talking then, Daniel, about point 2, I was thinking it's so linked to point 4, because I was thinking, is that really what a data scientist should be doing? Doing statistical stuff to sort of check the data. I mean, yes, they should be doing that, but it kind of speaks that actually maybe what the business needs for that point is an analyst to really have a clear picture of the business's data. And maybe that speaks to another red flag that a data scientist could have when vetting a potential future organization to join, is to say, what data analysts do you have, and sort of, what do you already know about your data?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's where I do think it is good around expectations, because if you come in expecting to do a lot of analytics and that's what they want you to do and you're okay doing that, then it's totally fine. Where I tend to see things going wrong is someone wants to make a data science team, and so they say, well, we need a PhD. What are the top 20 universities we can all name right now? Let's go find someone from there and let's hire them. And that person is generally not super interested in doing basics analytics for a large portion of their time. To your point, it is definitely part of the job. But if it's 80-90% of your job and you have a PhD from MIT and machine learning, you're maybe not super excited about that role for very long.
Yeah, I mean, this is Dave here breaking in. I work at a private equity firm, and most of our businesses, they don't have good dashboards, but saying that there's no one that's a data literate person at those businesses is probably not right. But they're definitely not code literate at the decision makers. And so, the firm decided to bring me in because I always say don't hire data scientists unless you want someone that has no domain knowledge but really likes statistics. And so if you are hiring a team, you need to be grounded in the what the existing organization expectations already are. And so I've been building infrastructure for the last 9 months and haven't built I've built a model, but I haven't put a model in production just because all of the work right now is getting the organization ready to accept those models. And a lot of the early models are just simple regressions. They're not these really unicorns and rainbow things that people that sell AutoML sell you. They're just easy ways to get stuff onto a dashboard.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's where most companies should start. And hopefully this article help people maybe see a little bit of that differentiation and things you should be asking. I think maybe in my mind to kind of close out, because I think we're running out of time a little bit, is I think we too can be better at looking for some of these red flags as data scientists, so we don't, empower companies to make hires. Like if companies are trying to hire and they can't hire, then they probably have to look at themselves and think, I'm doing something wrong. I need to make changes. And then I think the last point that we haven't really talked on, I will say, is number 5, which is you're not prepared for the true cost of a data scientist, where a lot of this is not cheap, especially if you're not already a tech company and you're not familiar with things like server costs, storage costs, computation costs. It can be a little bit jarring to be like, wait, we're spending $10,000+ a month on, what is this thing, AWS? Like what? And now you want us to build you these really expensive computers? Like, this wasn't part of the plan. For a lot of tech companies, that's a little more obvious. But for some companies trying to get into data science that aren't, naturally server heavy, they're very surprised to get these additional costs.
How do we put those costs in perspective, though? Because it could be that moving from the model of having spreadsheets all over the place that take 4 days or 5 days of copying and pasting to aggregate and cascade the monthly or whatever results up, that has a cost to it. Whereas if the data were available and you could do that by, just a scheduled query that automatically runs every month, suddenly you've gained like 4 man days a month back. So you've got this sort of, the finance person there should be aware that that has been freed up. So you either need to not have to throw as many people at the reporting as you originally were, or they can actually start to add value doing something else.
Well, Guy, I can talk to this specifically because we've purchased a budgeting software tool called Maestro because I was doing the budgeting. And so that's taken away my time in Excel to validate the data and get it all into a workable format. So the time I'm saving from doing the data integrity checks, I can actually focus on getting more accurate forecasting in the information from the senior leadership team. I'm trying to obviously justify the cost of the software to do that because it's going to be an annual cost to us, right? So some of the feedback is, well, that's pretty expensive software. You can just hire an accountant a certain value, and he could be doing the Excel gymnastics all day, right? And that's some of the mindset we have to deal with. But you have to see that if we can create an efficiency in somewhere that it's going to add value somewhere, you have to justify that cost, right? That software cost or that back-end support cost, because it's going to lead to better decisions and better information to the senior leadership team. Because if we can make more money or we can make better decisions and that impacts the CEO of the company, he's going to support your program, your department, because he sees the value firsthand.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's all about expectations. Like, if they're just wanting to move some Excel data over, it's probably worth mentioning, hey, there will be some costs, but they're not going to be that big. But if they're like, I want to do real-time deep learning on, on every Twitter piece of data that comes through my feed, then you might be like, this is going to be expensive. Maybe it's not worth starting here. And I kind of think that's the truth for all these points. Like, even at point number 1, you don't have any data. Maybe you still hire a data person because you think there are opportunities there for you to become a data-driven company. But it's not something you should do without the right expectation, because the expectation of, in my opinion, most data scientists is to come in and have kind of some set of problems to solve. If you're looking for someone to really build out your strategy, that's a really different hire. And that's where I do think the title data science is a little confusing, because it can mean lots of things to lots of different people. And so that's where I think a lot of these things come up, is you can solve these problems by hiring if you can hire the right people. But if you're just going to go out and say, I'm going to hire a data scientist and he or she will naturally be able to solve all of these problems, no problem, it's generally a recipe for disaster. So
I think that's a good note to end on. So Tyler, anything else you want to leave the audience with? And also, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, no, I mean, thanks for joining. I appreciate people spending some time discussing these. I think it's interesting. I'm always very interested in just getting more involved with data science communities. So if you want to connect, I'm on LinkedIn. I do a bit of a blog, obviously, if you want to see the things that I write. And don't hesitate to reach out if something I can do to help. Always happy to give thoughts, ideas, and generally just kind of help grow the data science community.
That's awesome. Yeah, and thanks for everyone who showed up. I think this is a great hour and a half fun conversation. Actually, it's time flew, but had people from all over the world show up, and this is great. So hopefully do it again soon. So
Yeah. Thanks for coming, Joe.
Yeah, anytime. See everybody
my
back.
first time with Google Meet.
Yeah. Yeah, thoughts on Google Meet? Do you think it Zoom next time, or is Meet fine?
Meet's good.